Franny with the Sherburne SWCD. Welcome to the third day of Pollinator Week. Today we decided to take you out on a prairie. We are at the History Center in Becker at their nice prairie that's nice and well developed to talk about some different ways we can incorporate habitat into our landscapes that benefit our pollinators like bees and butterflies. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about our native bees, because a lot of times when people think about bees, they think about honeybees or maybe the bumblebee. But there are 450 different types of bee species in the state of Minnesota. That is a lot of different kinds of bees that require very different types of habitat, because most of those bees are actually solitary, meaning they don't have a colony, which what we typically associate like honeybees with. And honeybees are actually not native, they're from Europe, and they've been brought over for our crop pollination, which is obviously an essential for them. But we have a lot of native bees that we can help in our landscape as well. So a majority of our native bees are actually ground nesting. So that means they dig a little tunnel in the ground, and the female will create a little offshoot channels to lay her larva. And it's just the one female since they are solitary. So it's not going to be a horde of bees coming out of this one nest in the ground. So leaving bare space in your garden, like what we have here in the prairie, there's some bare spots, allow the bee access to the ground where she can build her nest. Other bees are stem nesters, so they require leftover stalks of flowers or grasses, or sometimes like raspberry canes that have the pithy stem that the bees can either hollow out or that they're already hollow to create their nest in that. So in the fall, when you have the tendency to cut down your spent flower stalks, leave those up, because some bees might already have created a nest that might be overwintering in them. But if you don't have a lot of those flower stalks or grass stalks that you can leave up, you can purchase a product called a bee house. And I have an example here. You can buy these at most garden centers these days, and they have different size cavities for the various bee species that nest in stems. And it's really fun to watch these in the summertime, because different kinds of bees use different material to fill their nest. So there are leaf cutter bees, and so you'll notice leaves being shoved in to block the entrance of the stem once the female has laid all of her eggs. And some bees use resin from trees, some use mud. So it's fun to see the different kinds of fill material. So you know there are a lot of different kinds of bees using your nest. But if you do use these store-bought bee houses, it's important to maintain them by keeping them clean. Otherwise, pests and disease can spread. And then the remaining like 1% of our native bees are cavity nesters. So they like to go after abandoned rodent nests or holes in downed trees, logs, things like that. So if you have a woodland, leaving those downed trees or even just piles of brush are really great habitat for our native bee species. So now that we know a little bit more about how to help our native bee species in our landscape, let's move over to butterflies. The monarch butterfly has been kind of the poster child for butterfly conservation, and most people know that there's a relationship between the monarch butterfly and the milkweed plant, and that's because the monarch lays its eggs on milkweed species, and then the eggs hatch and the caterpillars use those leaves to feed on until they're ready to develop into an adult butterfly. But there are lots of butterflies that have those very specific relationships. So we need to make sure to incorporate a wide variety of flowers, so we're supporting all those different kinds of butterflies. And so we're going to go over just a few of those relationships that are pretty specific to Sherburne County in our sandy soils in prairie habitats like what we have here. And not everything is blooming right now, but we'll at least be able to show you some of the plants. So here we have a spent wild lupine plant, and wild lupine is a host to the Carner blue butterfly. It's a smaller butterfly, but it has really nice distinct blue wings. And so they lay their eggs on the wild lupin, and then the caterpillars feed on those leaves. And the lupin has a very beautiful blue flower late spring, early summer. So this one's already had its time to shine. But also something we don't really think about are grasses. There are a lot of different kinds of butterflies that use grasses as their host plant. And there are some pretty rare and endangered species in the Minnesota area, like the Dakota skipper, the Uncas skipper. They both rely on grasses. So the Dakota skipper relies on prairie dropseed. The Uncas skipper uses different kinds of grama. So there's hairy grama and blue grama and side oats grama. And we have some examples in this prairie. It's kind of hard to point them out because they're intermixed amongst other grasses, but that's just something to keep in mind. It's not always flowers that we need to include in our landscaping. So I've mentioned some different kinds of habitats that you can incorporate into your landscape, which includes plants. And you're probably thinking, well, I've never really heard of these plants, or I've never seen them in my local garden center. And that's because they're very specific to our region. They're native plants, so they've evolved over thousands of years to be adapted to our climate, our soils, our precipitation. And there are native specific nurseries that grow these types of plants. So on the Minnesota Department of Natural Resource website, they have a really good resource that shows all of the native plant suppliers in the state, and you can click specifically for your region, and it'll pop up a nice list of where you can get all of these plants to incorporate into your landscape. So with that, thank you for joining us with this video. Please stay tuned for other fun Pollinator Week activities.